Full confession this morning. I am sick. I have this cold that everyone's getting right now, and also it's just a super busy time at work. And on top of that, I'm in the pit of West Side Story. Perhaps you've heard of the musical, but the high school is putting it on. It's really fun, but it's exhausting. It's every night, and all of this is to tell you about my tragic self. And I hope you'll be able to listen to this without pulling over to the side of the road or stopping what you're doing and breaking into tears of sadness for me and my tragic life. But as I looked at this Saturday and I thought, okay, I made a promise to put out a weekly blog update, just demonstrate what it's like to live a life of facing up. I can't only do that when things are going smoothly, when I feel well prepared. Life isn't always a game where you bat 1,000, right? You make mistakes, and sometimes things are less than perfect. But in the interest of just being real with you, I decided I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going for it today. And what I've decided to talk about today is just this sense of chaos and maybe even despair, or for some people, maybe it's elation. Just this, this royal, this, what's the right word? There's just this turmoil right now that so many people are feeling. Because of our political situation and all the changes that are happening in our government. And what I would like to do today is take the map that I shared with you last week, this idea, it's really kind of the basis of facing up, because again, my claim is not that I have shared with you a new philosophy or a new system or a new way of putting the pieces together to make life make sense. The map is meant simply to describe the human condition. It's a map of human beings. So it applies to everything. It applies to me and my daily struggle for meaning, and it applies I can look at what's happening in our nation and what's happened historically, and I can see it on this map of human existence. So I want to demonstrate that today. And it kind of starts where most of our problems start as human beings, as Homo sapiens, us wise homos. Oh, that would work, wouldn't it, if we called ourselves wise homos? That has a whole different vibe to it, doesn't it? Anyway, us Homo sapiens, us wise, arrogant creatures, we really tend to put our trust in our own understanding, in our own imagination. I mean, I think of that verse in Proverbs, to lean not on your own understanding. That's some good advice, because as we look at things and perceive things, that's not how they are, capital A. That's just our perception of them at the time. But we look at stuff and we tell a story about what we see, and then we put our faith in that story. Again, I'll repeat a line that I just really love. Our superpower as a species is the fact that we tell stories. Our Achilles heel is that we believe them. Stories as an expression of our humanity are right and beautiful, and it's a big part of what makes us human. But stories as a foundation of our existence, well, that's arrogant, and every story is crushed. So, to the present turmoil. I realized a long time ago that what was happening in our nation is very similar to what was happening to me. Of course, I am a citizen of this nation, but on a personal level, I had a foundational story. My Christian faith was a foundational story. And when that story began to crash into some things that didn't add up, I worked very hard to adjust the pieces of what I saw to fit my story, because I was walking by faith, not by sight. I trusted my story, my imagination, my what I said about what I saw was more important to me than what I saw. So what I saw had to be fit inside of what I said. Okay. And of course, it wasn't just what I said. There's a whole tradition there of people who believed in this God of the Bible and Jesus and the whole Christian story. So anyway, when that began to break down, it threw me into turmoil and chaos. So when I look at the national turmoil and chaos, I can see a very similar thing happening, but just on a national scale rather than a personal one. The story that I grew up with as a baby boomer, I'm barely a baby boomer. I was born in 1963, so I'm on the tail end of baby boomerism. But it's fair to say that I was swept up in this wash of prosperity and optimism and up, and everything's just getting better, and all these stories that were a part of America coming out of World War II into this time of great economic growth and cultural prosperity and just optimism and pride and all of those things. I'm part of that. Okay, so that's a strong story. And I would title that story America the Great. And I was all in on that story. Well, who wouldn't want to be a part of that story? I live in the greatest nation in the world. I'm part of I'm coming out of the greatest generation that ever lived. There were some pieces of the story that I just wrote down in my notes here, but the economy was booming. We had this sense that as a nation, we had saved the world from Hitler, right? We would all be wearing jack boots and marching in goose step. If it weren't for the United States, we stepped in and saved the world by inventing the atomic bomb and dropping it on Japanese. I mean, there's some pieces of the story that you have to massage a little bit. But anyway, we had this sense, and to be fair and to give proper honor to the people who fought, my goodness, there were people who genuinely sacrificed to prevent the world from being taken over by a truly maniacal leader. And so, I think we were right to feel pride in our role in World War II. But we had this mentality because we had been successful at this. I remember, I just have picture coming to my mind of that woman with her, sleeve rolled up, and she's making a muscle, and we can do it. That was sort of our attitude. We also were big believers in democracy. We had, by golly, the very best, the most sophisticated in the history of the world. We had come up with the best way to function as a society. Everybody was copying us because, well, look at us. We're crushing it. So we had this optimism and pride in our democracy. And then I would say that another part of this story is that we were Christian-ish. Of course, there were many like brands of this Christianity, many versions of it, but for the most part, we all sort of bought into the Western Judeo-Christian ideas and values, and we were kind of on the same page. We had little problems with racism, and so there were some things that weren't so great, Vietnam and all these wars. Well, you can see, even looking back in my childhood in the 60s and then teenage years in the 70s, that this story the threads were starting to unravel immediately. Because, like when I was growing up, it was in the middle of the Vietnam War, and nobody wanted to go fight, and the government was very much distrusted. Of course, we had Nixon, I'm not a crook, and all of that. And then that moved on to the Gulf War, and then our involvement in Afghanistan, go back a little bit, the Korean War even. So this idea that we are this like shining city on a hill. It was like sometimes there seemed to be a little tarnish in our shine. But more recently, this story has not just unraveled, it's really starting to fall apart completely. And just to list a few things that come to mind, one of them is, this idea this Christian idea that human beings are the like God's gift to the world. We had this idea. I had this very, this is very core to me, that as a human being, God made all the other stuff and said, that's okay. But then he made human beings and said, now that's good. And by the way, of all the other things, the only one made in God's image is us, which should have been a little suspicious to me looking back, but that's the way we viewed it. But so we had this idea, and then we're running into this issue of climate change. Well, of course, climate change isn't real. It couldn't be, right? That doesn't fit my narrative of man the savior. Man the destroyer? That our fossil fuels and our basically rapacious appetite for this beautiful blue ball is actually devouring it, and we're turning it into a junkyard. Well, whoa, that does not fit in America the Great at all. But here we are facing that reality regularly. And so it's like, I have this conflict between America the Great and my lived experience. Another one, this idea that our government is the best in the world and, the envy and everyone should copy us. Well, the government is kind of becoming a mess, and has been for a while. And there's this conflict, and now special interests, are like inserting themselves, and motives are really questionable. And it looks like people are doing insider trading, and that really it's not we the people, it's we the powerful, we the influential, we the corporation. And what's going on there, and how do we fix this? Oh, and of course, we the politician, the swamp creatures who have like infiltrated the government and latched onto these jobs and won't let go, and they like their power. And wait a minute, what happened to our great democracy? So like we have this story of democracy is crumbling. Another huge thing that has happened, and it's just, you can't overstate it, is the profusion of technology, and especially the coming of the internet, the World Wide Web, and then social media, and the way that the world has shrunk in terms of communications. That has really made a mess of our story, because all of a sudden, instead of like being able to be sort of isolated and have this safe place to tell your story, all these other stories are entering into the mix, and they make a mess of my story. So Africa has a story, and South America has a story, and Europe has a story, and Russia. Everybody has all these ideas, and religions, and political ideas. And so this nice, safe bubble that I grew up in, where everyone I knew was American, believed in democracy, was Christian-ish at least. Like that nice, safe place just got exploded, because now all these ideas just came crashing together, and we don't know what to make of the mess. We're trying to sort it out. So like, which story is right, or how do we put these stories together? And of course, social media has allowed us, through its algorithms, to tribalize and choose the story we want, and look at the world through a certain lens, and then look at the others as the enemy. And so, whoa, what has happened to America the Great? The other thing I want to mention, this probably deserves a whole podcast, but lying's a big deal to me, because when you tell a story about what you see and say, well, take an example. The old one about, okay, there's a collision between two cars, and there are people on all four corners of the intersection, and they all tell sort of a different story. But yes, that's true. There's different perspectives, right? But let's put it this way. If there were two people standing on the same corner, and they both watched the cars crash, so they saw exactly the same thing. They're touching each other. They're watching the red car comes in, the black car goes zooming through, and boom, there's a crash. Okay, so what they saw, my argument is that what they saw, their perception would be the same. Okay, maybe slightly different because, as we're not exactly wired the same, but as a species, we start from the basis of common perception. If we don't have that, it's just chaos. Like, I mean, it's so. Here's another way to put it. I may look at something and call it green, and my wife may look at the same thing and call it blue. In fact, we do that all the time. But what my argument is that what we see is probably very similar, maybe a little difference because of the rods in our eyes and the way our brains are wired or whatever. But the issue is the label that we are attaching to what we see. In other words, the conflict comes at the story level. So back to the cars that just crashed, one person might say, look, that red car came speeding in and selfishly tried to run the light, and the other car, was being great and put on its brakes and bam. And somebody else may say, no, the other car, the black car, that was the good car, and it came through and it slowed down, and it was the red car, or I may be saying this backwards, but you get the point that two people could look at exactly the same, have this exactly the same perception and tell different stories about it. Okay, that's understandable. What gets serious is when we tell people that what we saw is not what we saw. In other words, lying is seeing one thing and saying another. So, for example, and I got to throw our dear leader Donald Trump under the bus because he sees one thing and says another. The riots at the Capitol were a peaceful protest. I watched it on TV. It was not peaceful. You can say whatever you want about it, but it was a riot. If that's not a riot, but by saying the big lie over and over again, what's happening is he's trying to shape or change things at the perceptual level, trying to tell us that what we saw is not what we saw. Another word for that, of course, is gaslighting. This, by the way, is why it's such a big deal. Did he believe that that was a peaceful protest? In other words, when he looked at that, did he look at that and actually say, wow, that's a peaceful protest? And then he's saying what he saw to the best of his understanding. That would be somebody looking at something and labeling it peace. We might say, well, that's a weird definition of peace, but at least he's being true to himself. He believes it was peaceful. Okay, if that's the case, then we have more leniency for him because we say, well, he really believed this. On the other hand, if he's lying, if we say, no, he saw that, he saw the violence, but he's trying to tell us that what he saw isn't what happened. What we saw is not what happened. He's betrayed us not at the story level, but at the perceptual level. I'm not doing a great job of explaining this, but I hope you're getting the point. It's one thing to look at something and say we have a different interpretation of what we saw. It's another thing to say, I'm going to betray what I saw and tell the story that I want to be instead. It's not just Donald Trump who does this, but he kind of does it a lot. If you look at the whole, the migrants are eating the dogs and cats. Well, they weren't. And, it was clearly shown that this was a single incident and the person even apologized. But Donald Trump just kept saying that's what happened. They are doing that. In other words, the betrayal is not at, I have an interpretation that I want to share about these events. It was at the perceptual level. You didn't see what you thought you saw. And at that point, we are betraying our humanity. That's why lying is a big deal. If I can't look at things and embrace what I see as a part of who I am, or if I alter what I see, well, then who am I? What am I? At that point, the story has taken over as the central defining feature of what it means to be human. And we've surrendered perception as, I guess, auxiliary or something like that. So, anyway, more to come on that because I think that that whole idea of lying is a real big deal. Now, okay, so we live in this culture where the story America the Great has seemingly crumbled. So, what do? Well, there's really only two options. We make America great again, we fix the story, we go back to the story we once had, or we move on to some new story. We come up with a modified or slightly different story, or we update the story, but somehow we have to face this reality that we have encountered. The problem I see is that no new story will save us. Because the problem with stories is that they are not truth, capital T. They are human expressions, but they are not foundational truths. So my assertion is that we do not need a new story. What we need is a new way to regard story. And the basic change, that the shift that has to happen is we have to stop thinking of stories as foundational and begin to look at stories as expressions of our common vision, of our common perception. In other words, what we need to do is come together on the basis of our common sense and then lighten up about the stories we tell about what we see. And really, this is what I call facing up. Facing up starts with three foundational perceptions that I believe are universal and probably universally hated because they devour our idea of foundational story. Just to review, Iñárritu, right? This idea we look out and we really do not know why we are here, how this happened, what's the point of it all these big questions that we need answers to, we do not have. Vanitas, we're trying to tell a story with a happy ending. The idea is that if we can just get those people in power, then everything will be okay. And having been on the winning side back in the 80s when I was a conservative and, the conservatives came in and I thought, okay, here we go. Let the good times roll, happy ending. And then, our guys wound up getting caught in sexual scandals and all the heroes, whoa, they're not all they meant to be. And some of the things we did were kind of a disaster. And it's like, wait a minute. So Vanitas, we can't tell a story that has a happy ending. And the point is not that we can't be happy. The point is that we can't come to the end of the rainbow and to where we say we've entered, heaven. Everything is perfect now because X, Y, or Z has happened, or A, B, or C is in power. Iñárritu destroys our faith. Vanitas destroys our hope. And then Rapax makes a mockery of our love. Because at the core, we recognize that people all do things with their own self-interest at the core. Now, that's hard stuff to swallow, but those things are, I think, impossible to deny. Now, go back to the last couple of podcasts to where I kind of talk through how that harsh reality and the breakdown of our story can open up a way for us to live in wonder and acceptance and compassion, and then re-enter story in a new way where we're telling stories without making them dogma, where we're more playful together, and where we are working to harmonize together. So I think there is a way to come together on the ground of our common perception, or you might say our common sense, and to say, how can we play together? How can we tell a story that we could all win? That this could be fun, that the world could be beautiful and in harmony. But we can't do that if we start from the foundation of, I have the truth. My story is truth, capital T. And if you disagree with that, you're the enemy. Okay. In other words, I'll say it again. What we need is not a new story, whether it's Make America Great Again or whatever other stories may evolve. Every story will break down. If we could acknowledge that and understand that what we need is a new way to regard story, to me, that points to some hope for the human race. This map or this depiction of reality that I've shared, I say reality, that's the wrong word. Please strike that from the record, because I am not claiming that what human beings see is reality, capital R. What we see is human. It is part of what makes us human, but it is what unites us, okay? So this common perception and accepting this, again, I call that facing up. In the physical realm, you could look at a globe and you could see that we all agree on the shape of the oceans and the continents, and well, this is a great example. For a long time, of course, the obvious conclusion, if you just look out at your world, it looks flat. And so, of course, for a long time, people operated under the assumption that the world is flat. Or we looked up at the heavens and we saw things going around and we assumed, oh, we're the center and everything is going around. But then as we became more aware, as science and telescopes and studying and mathematics and all these things, we began to realize, oh, what that perception is not right. We need to redraw the map to match our more developed, more accurate, more informed perception. And that, by the way, to me, is the role of science. It is to look at things and to try to understand and to see what we perceive and to draw as accurate a map as we possibly can. But for the most part, as human beings, we agree on the globe. Like, you wouldn't walk into someone's house and say, oh, that continent's not there. Because it is there, right? We bump into it. You also wouldn't, walk into somebody's house and they say, oh, you're late. And you go, well, I don't believe in your concept of time. What? If you don't believe in, this common human perception of time, well, then, we can't really do anything together. We, as human beings, we perceive of day and night and, the seasons and the moon going around in months. And so we've agreed together. This is our perception as human beings, and we will operate together based on that. We make a calendar and dates and times. And so we can function together based on our common perception of time. Now, of course, time is way more complicated than that. It's integrated with space. And it's kind of arbitrary the way that we add days and make it all add up correctly. So, it's not like what we perceive is reality, capital R, but it is what we perceive. And based on that perception, we can come together and say, let's operate this way based on our common perception. So we can kind of agree on the shape of a globe and a clock. And based on that, we can function together. What I am claiming to do with my perceptual map, or another way to describe it would be with my map of human being, what I'm claiming to have done, which you may or may not buy, what I'm trying to do, that you can't argue with, because this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to describe human being, the human experience. What it feels like and is to be human. And so, again, I refer you to last week to look at that map. But, I'm just going to quickly summarize. We are creatures of desire, but we have consciousness. And so we're self-aware. And so we are plunged in as human beings. We can't help but see ourselves as in story, a story in time. And those stories are made of faith. And that's the story we tell, which defines our hope, what we hope for and fear, and our love. what we love, who we hate, all of that. But in come these specters, ignarus vanitas rapax, and we recognize, these stories are not reality. We cannot lean on them because they always crack, and that throws us into darkness and despair. This where we are right now, I think, as a nation, we're kind of in, or maybe even globally, a dark night of the soul where we're like, what is going on? Our stories are crumbling, and it's terrifying. But my assertion is that, well, and I would say more than assertion, I mean, my experience has been that when you accept these things, when you face up to this, it opens the door to a life of wonder, a life of acceptance, and a life of compassion. Of course, you don't have to do that. You can say no and say if the story doesn't make sense, nihilism. If there's no hope, I'm going to live in despair. If love is kind of fundamentally selfish, well, then I just F you all. I don't want anything to do with anybody else. You can live in nihilism, despair, and alienation. It's understandable in light of the breakdown of your story, but you don't have to. You can choose life. You can face up, right? As in look up, as in be positive, as in say yes to my life. In the face of all of this, I still choose wonder, acceptance, and compassion. Not because I'm a good thing, a good being, but just because it's better and it's more deeply human. And then from that perspective, you can enter back into your life of story in a fresh way, in a light way. And so you don't have story, capital S, you have stories that we tell. And we approach them in a more playful fashion, and it's possible for us then to harmonize. Okay, so I guess in a couple of words, when I look at the chaos, what I want to say to everyone is just lighten up. Lighten up and let go of your foundational story. When you turn your story into reality, capital R, that's dogma. And what you have to do then is you have to fit what you see into that story. And that's exactly what you see in a lot of the stories going out from the left and the right. We start with a dogma, we start with a story, and then we look at what we see, and then we make it fit into the story. That's walking by faith in your story, not sight, putting the story ahead of the perception. And what I'm saying is we need to switch that around and put the perception first, and then say, okay, lighten up. What shall we make of what we see? What shall we make of this mess? If we say, well, my story is the answer, then we're in for tribalism, we're in for war, we're in for dogma, we're in for a fight. If we step back and face up to the facts that we really don't have a lot of answers, that we can't finally make everything okay, that we are fundamentally driven by self-interest, we face those things and choose wonder, acceptance, and compassion in the face of those things, then we can enter into story in a new way that allows us to tell a story that is more playful and harmonious. And again, lighten up. And I like that word lighten because it has sort of a nice double meaning. Lighten up as in, don't take it so seriously. But also, when you do that, you lighten up as in it's more illuminated. It's more alive. There's more light on the subject when we lighten up. All right, I've made it to the end of this little diatribe through my cough, through my dizziness of being like overwhelmed by all the stuff on my plate right now. And as promised, it may be just a little rambly, a little splattery, but that's life. And I'm hoping as I share my real-time ongoing experience that maybe it will inspire thoughts in you, because we're all processing this, right? It's not like any of us has this all neatly figured out with a bow on it. But this is just my my sharing with you of my attempt to process what's going on in this crazy world right now through the lens of facing up.